Recording now. I am now recording, and I see my mic is live. So, let's see. The date is the last day of November, November 30th, and I guess I better turn on my overheads here. Only 2 or 3 people here. I'm hoping more people will join us. And today, today will be our last. No, next week will be our last scheduled class meeting. And this is the November 30th scheduled class meeting of ITSC 2309 at Collin College. I skipped over module 12, and we skipped over module 12, and I did module 13, which was creating and maintaining indexes. And if you find that assignment to be easy, well, it is at this state. Essentially, you create indexes on foreign keys and anything else that you think your users are going to be searching on a lot. For example, maybe the last name of the vendor contact. Hint, hint. I would think that would be a good one. It is kind of a subjective thing. We do not create indexes on a primary key because there already is one. A primary key is an index. We do not create an index. We haven't done a lot of constraining things to unique, but I can constrain a field to be unique. If so, I already have an index on it. There's other things that come into that, but I'm going to leave that until the next class. Talk a little bit today, or either today or next class meeting, about the next class and see if you're interested in joining us. Today I'm going to focus on module 14, database views, and then I'm going to back up a little bit today and cover 12, leaving the lecture for next period as largely a review. Once I finish the module 14, I have essentially finished SQL proper. So SQL is really kind of a minor subset of a much larger thing. So SQL, it's important to know SQL, but it gets bigger from here. So we're going to talk about a database view. And database views intro. Let's see what I have here. Okay. I'm going to go on to the next one. These are the objectives. Here's a fairly good tutorial. I'm not going to play this, but it's a as I recall, it's fairly good. A database, a view is simply a view is simply an SQL query that is saved and treated as a table. Excuse me, I'm hoarse today. Okay, hopefully that's the end of that. So I take a SQL select query. Select from where? It can have a group by, it can have a subselect, it can have inner join, outer join in it, and I can save that, give it a name, and that name will be treated as a table. Some of you may have done Access. Access people, have you done Access? Access, oh good. I don't know that it's good. Access isn't bad. Access is just used wrong. If I create a query in Access, I save that query. And then I can select from that query, I can write further queries that use that query. Okay. So essentially, it's kind of like doing a subselect where I have named it, and now by naming it, I have to be careful with saying becomes a table, but it's treated as a table because the outcome, the result of an SQL query is a table. So that's the important piece of that. The result of an SQL query is a table. Good morning, Anita. I'm just seeing who's logged in. Okay, so if I save that query.
Good morning, Professor.
If I save the query and give it a name, then, well, it's a table. But the good thing about it is I don't duplicate all of the data. So if I need, I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I back up and cover some of the database design aspects. In Microsoft Access, what they call a query is really a view because it's saved. So SQL is just an SQL statement, but if I say save it, now it is saved in the database, and now I can select from it, so it becomes a table, if you like. Let's see what I have here. Okay, consider some SQL select query. Okay, here it is. Select everything from vendors, where vendor state is California. Okay, pretty straightforward little query there. Select from where. And so I created it as a view. I say create view, California Dreamin', California vendors, select everything from vendors. So basically I just copy and paste this, and now it creates a view. Important thing about creating a view, let me copy this, and I'll go over to my view query. So I say use AP_DB, and then I copy that guy, and I get a red line. And so why do I get a red line? And here is where it finally starts enforcing something. I told you at the beginning of class that any time that we did the create anything, it should be in its own Go block. Now, what is Go? You'll find that if you go over to tools, let me just show you this just for fun. I do not recommend that you do it. Tools, let's see, options. Is it execution? No. There we go, right there. Under query execution, the batch separator is Go. Now, if I went here, don't do this because you're really going to confuse yourself and everybody. But if I decide that I want to change it, I don't want it to be Go, I want it to be stop or something else, it's gonna work the same way. Don't make it be select. That's really going to confuse everything. You could come up with your own word that meant Go. Vete, I guess, where don't do it because everybody's expecting it to be Go. But if you change it here, it's changed. Go is not an SQL term. It is an SQL specific term. So I don't worry too much about it. But if you do create, anytime you create, including creating tables, although it doesn't enforce this, you should have a Go, and it ends with a Go. Now, if that's the end of the batch down there, I don't need that Go on line 9, but I do have to have the Go on line 3 because I have another statement above it. So now when I execute this, it will work. So if I say execute, and now it says, okay, what did I do? I created that view. If I tried to run it again, I would get an error because it says it's already there. So I would need to have a I would need a drop here. So I need to drop that view. If it exists, drop it. Just like we did with the table, except it's drop view. And now I can do anything just like I select from a table. I can say select everything from California vendors. And execute that. And notice I got them all, but notice that I only see under vendor state, I only see CF. California. Now, leading me to when I create a view of California vendors, I probably don't need to show you the vendor state. I can just leave that out, because in order to be in that view, they have to be in California. I don't have a way. The question was, do I have an easy way, a graceful way to select everything except vendor state? I guess you could do a set difference and take it out. The easiest thing to do is just to name all the columns you want and leave out vendor state. There's other ways, but you have to remember that you don't want to add any complexity to a view, because even though with a view I am not duplicating the data. So these data down here that I'm showing are in the vendors table. They're not duplicated into a new table, although it looks to me like I'm using a new table. Okay. Well, it's actually, this is a question came in. It's better than having a straight man in the audience here, because ask, can I update this view? The answer is with a qualified yes, you can update a view. I'm qualifying that. Okay, you can update a view if I have everything that I need, if I have all of the columns. For example, if I took vendor state out and vendor state were a required field, then I would not be able to insert a row into the California vendors table. Okay, so that would be an argument for leaving it in there. And I could, and if I didn't want to see it, I could just take it out at the select. So that would be an argument to leave it in there. The other thing I could do is over in the table, I could default it to California. Since I have far more vendors that live in California than live anyplace else, when you insert one, if I just defaulted it to California, then I would be able to insert it into this view. Okay. It does, it updates the underlying table. Is the question. So I'm being asked, can I insert and update? Okay, if you have a select everything coming from one table, then you can insert, update, delete from that view, and it will insert, update, and delete the underlying table. There are other conditions where maybe those two, where you're selecting everything, maybe you're selecting not everything. If you are selecting all of the required fields of that table, which is most of them if I built the table, if I'm not going to require it, I'm probably not going to have it in there, but I might have some that I allow to be null. In that case, you would be able to insert, and they would just take nulls. So if I inserted something, if state were not required, and I inserted into the view, then state would simply get null. Notice that if I inserted something besides California, the resulting row would not be in the view. Are you with me? So can I do that? The answer is yes, but let me go back to, if I have a table join, so if I'm selecting the vendor ID, for example, from vendors join invoices, and I tried to update vendor ID, which one would it update? Would it update the one in the vendors table or the one in the invoices table? So as long as there is no equivocation, I can update even a table that is a view built on a table join. So if that were joined, I can create a view on anything except one. I'm going to talk about that right now, but just soon I finish this. As long as it is unequivocal which table I'm updating, I can update the view. but you never update primary keys anyway. If I'm updating that foreign key and I've got a join in there, you get an equivocation, meaning two ways to no and no way to tell which field you're updating. It's in both tables. Then you cannot update that field. Obviously, you could not insert into a table join. But if the view is fairly simple, you can insert, update, and delete on the view. Questions? Okay, I left out one piece, order by. Okay, you cannot create a view on order by, and at one point, I think it was 2014, the SQL Server made a liar out of me when I said you can't create a view with an order by. Sometimes, for some strange reason, SQL Server will create a view that has order by in it. In general, in SQL, you cannot. And I want to make this a general class in SQL. So as a rule, order by is out on a view. Now, why is that so? Why can't I create a view from an ordered SQL query? The answer is because a view really is a table, and a table is, by definition, unordered. Fair enough? Okay. So creating a view, I can create a view out of any SQL statement that does not include any SQL select statement that does not include a order by. Now in Microsoft Access, they create what they call update queries and delete queries, and those really have no place in database. But this isn't a class on Access. All right, I'm going to put my if object ID California vendors What's that now? Is dropping null an error? If you try to drop a view that, let's see, if I just say drop view and it's dropped, now if I try to do it again, it'll give me an error. And that error will cause my batch file to stop. My batch file is, well, it wouldn't hurt this one because Go comes after it. So if I throw an error right here on line 3, then I would proceed to line 7 because it would terminate that batch. But if I had other statements inside that Go after line 5, say, they would not be executed. So I don't like throwing errors. I don't like the red letters under here. So, and let's create the view. Now, many times views are used to enforce security on the database. For example, one common place you find it is human resources. A person whose department is equal to HR, human resources, can read the personnel file of any employee. Is that right? Let's say it is. You can see all of the company's personnel files, HR file, because you're in HR. But you're not allowed to see HR files. Now, they're all in just one big table, but I don't want you to be able to see the HR files, okay? So I would create a view, said select everything from personnel, a table would be named personnel, where the department was not equal to HR. Now they're not there. Now, who is it that manages the HR personnel jackets? Well, that's usually finance or whatever you're calling it, the people who cut the paychecks. Accounting, yeah. Okay, so HR manages accounting personnel jackets, and someone that's in accounting management manages HR. So then I would say create another view for the accounting people that says that they're select everything from personnel from the HR table where it equals HR. So now HR people can see everybody but their own, and the accounting people can see HR's personal record. I'm going to talk about grant and granting privileges. Okay, idea here is that since I can update this, let me see if I can get this right. If it's with, I might have to Google this because our textbook, nope. Option. It's with check. It just I'm having a little issue getting it in the right place. X. Go there. Nope. Okay, time for Google. I'm showing you that I don't know exactly. I don't always have all of the syntax right at my fingerprint. So I'm going to say create view. Where's MySQL? Let's see. Okay, it comes at the end as, that should work. There we go. Okay, I just had to get that syntax right. And this is SQL, so it should work in any SQL implementation, which in theory, everything we've talked about, well, except Go, and except for the if object ID is not null and all that stuff, should work in all SQL. So all SQL is going to have inner join, outer join. It's going to have subselects. It's going to have, what else have we done? Index, you'll create an index. They do the same thing in all of them. Some of them are a little better than others. Okay, with check option. With check option means that this view, because it is created on one table and it has all of the fields, therefore I can insert into that view. It will be inserted into the vendors table. If I update that view, I will update the vendors table. Delete, same thing. Delete everything from the view, I delete from the vendors table. When I put the with check option, I'm saying that you cannot do anything to the view except delete a record. You can delete a record, but you cannot do anything to the view that would cause a row that was in the view not to be in the view now, and you cannot insert into the view something that would not be in the view. Now, if you think about that, that's a security enhancement. It stops me from changing a record. For example, if I'm in accounting, it stops me from creating a record over in R&D and then changing it to accounting and making it be in something that I can't see. So I've added a row that I can't see through the view. I have stepped outside of my security bounds of the view. Questions? Everybody okay? Okay, if I have any questions, I think everybody is unmuted.
I have a question, but not for today, from today's lecture. So I'm still working on it.
Okay.
Today's lecture.
Why don't we, if it's not on something that I'm doing right now, I will take it.
Okay.
But let me finish this up.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I missed the last class, so I'm just learning these things. So I'm little behind.
Well, the last class was indexing, and that's not real. Well, it's very important, but it's fairly easy to do. So do get that lecture. Okay, I'm going to move on. Anita, you may. Josh, are you there? Okay. So I had to Google that one. So with check option means I'm going to protect the view from being updated such that it changes anything that's not in the view. So with check option won't stop me from deleting from the view. It will stop me from inserting anything that would not end up being in the view, and it will stop me from updating any row in the view such that it would drop out of the view. Now, this is commonly used, not so much the with check. Consider a patient's table in a doctor's office. Now, I pointed out that we never, ever, practically never, almost never delete rows from a database. Okay. In a doctor's office, that table is just going to continue to grow. There is a limit to how far they can grow, of course, but you know, 1 million rows in there. It's a single practitioner. Probably won't have 1 million patients, so they're probably okay just leaving them all in one table. Except what happens? Well, patients move. Do I delete the patient's medical records? No way. A patient sadly dies. Do I delete that patient's medical records? Absolutely not. I have to keep that patient's medical records from now on. Okay. All my notes, all that jazz. So the way I'm going to get around that is when I build the table, I'm going to put in a field, and I'm going to call that field active. And I'm going to default that field to 1. Okay. Set the field to 1. And then when I create a patient, the patient comes in, I just leave that empty, and the patient comes in, the active is 1. So my active patients then are a view. I say select everybody from everything, all the records from the patient's table where active is equal to 1. I'm going to see active. I would not put the with check option on that. That's not a security issue. It's just I wouldn't do it. When a patient is no longer in my practice, when I haven't seen the patient in a long time, and now they're going to inactive status, I would go in and simply change that field from active to inactive to 0. Are you not allowed to do that? If I put the with check option, because the whole idea is to cause that patient's record to drop out of my active patients and to suddenly appear in a different view, inactive patients. So now if I'm selecting from active patients, I won't see that patient any longer. I would take the with check option off of that view because that's what I want to do. I want to go in and say they're all ones. If I set it from 1 to 0, and then now he just disappears. Okay. But he's not deleted. So I would block deletes, and in the next class, the next class after this course, the next course I mean, you'll learn how to stop anybody from deleting. Okay, that's pretty much the views in a nutshell. Okay, there's the with check option right there. Okay, if I tried to update California vendors, now if I update California vendors, there's nothing wrong with that. But if I try to update California vendors and I try to make vendor ID 12 be living in Texas, but I have the with check option stopping me, if I try to update it like that, it's gonna update California vendors. Well, why can't I see that? FORNIAVENDORS. I don't know, maybe I should see it. Oh, why am I getting an invalid name there? I guess I dropped it. Didn't mean to. Okay. Now, attempted insert or update failed because the target view specifies the with check option, meaning that you can't do that. I can insert into it as long as I'm inserting the state of California, CA. Okay. Let's see what else. Benefits provided by a view, I get design independence. This lets me modify the database, but keep the basic tables that you were using. So I might change the table name. I don't like changing table names, but a table name might change. A table name might need to break into 2 tables. Views that are created provide access only to those data. We might talk a little bit about it. We simplify queries. So for example, remember we used the, back in the subselect module, we did derived tables. Remember doing derived tables, select something from, and then another select statement in there. So a derived table is essentially a view. Remember, we had to give that derived table a name. It was just a view that existed for just a moment, and then it went away. Most of the time, instead of using a derived table, I would simply create a view. Creating a view is cheap. There's a small cost, I guess, to storing it in the database, but instead of, I don't duplicate all of the data. Let's see what I got next. An example.
What gets stored? Is it just a create view command, or is there some like block pointer?
Well, the view itself is stored. I think it's it doesn't store the text, so it's more sophisticated than just storing text. Concrete example of a database view. I'm gonna, before this, I want to go back to this guy. Let's see, I'm going to the AP database. Look at the tables. And let's look at the invoices table. I'm going to edit the top 200 rows. Let's take a look at the data that are in the invoices table. Lots of times I just like having this to look at it. And so we have everything here. And notice this, this column right here, invoice total column. All right. What is this invoice total column? Well, it's money.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. What is it? It's the total on this invoice. Now, let's go look also at the invoice line items table. I'm going to also edit these top 200 rows. And notice here that we have an invoice line item total. Well, what is the invoice total? For example, on invoice sequence 1, $3,813.33. If I go over and I look at invoice ID 1, is $3,813.33. So the invoice total is the sum of the invoice line item. So if I add up these, for example, down here, let me undo that. Oh, well. Notice that on invoice ID 12, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 invoice sequence numbers. And if I added up all of these amounts, I would get the invoice total. Comments? This is bad. Why is this bad? Could lead to an inconsistency. Actually, there's a lot of things wrong with this table. One of the things that's wrong with this table is the fact that I have, if you look over here in the, if I were to look at the columns of this table, notice that I have invoice line items. Invoice ID. Well, where's the invoice sequence number? Oh. Okay. I'm looking at the wrong table. Notice that if I'm looking at the invoice line items, what is the primary key to invoice line items? Here it is right here. It's a two-factor primary key. Okay. I would rather eat a bug than have a two-factor primary key. And you almost get to pick the bug. I just don't want a two-factor primary key. Never in any way I can get around it. But I have one here. Now let's look at the data that are in this. So it's invoice ID and invoice sequence. What does that mean? I have the two-factor primary key, means that the together the invoice ID and the invoice sequence number have to be unique, and neither can be null. Okay. So it's okay to have duplicate invoice sequence numbers if the invoice ID is different. It's okay to have, where was that? I know it's all ones, but I'm looking for the one that wasn't. Here, I have a duplicate invoice ID, but different invoice sequence numbers. What is wrong with this situation? How can I make this better? First thing I would do with this table is I would rewrite it. And my invoice sequence number would be the primary key. So it would start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When we got down here to 11, I'd have 11, 11. I would have 12, 12, 12, 13, 12, 14, 12, 15, 13, 16, 14, 17, 15, 18, and so on. So my invoice sequence number would be the primary key. The invoice ID would simply be a foreign key to the invoices table. You with me? Now, why is that better? First place, I just have one primary key, one field primary key. Can I still find all of the invoice line items that belong to invoice ID 12? Sure. Sure, I probably have an index on invoice ID because it's a foreign key. Definitely have one on invoice sequence. So it doesn't hurt me a bit. So I can go through there and I can find everybody. Now I can't.
What if you have to find the second invoice line item on the invoice?
The second one? I don't have a second one. I'll almost never do that. I won't find the second one. I can find all of the invoices that have more than one, right? I can find it where it's greater than the minimum, so I can do some stuff there. I can do anything that you can do with this. I can do with just one primary key. Okay. So that'd be the first thing I'd try to get around on this design. The other thing I want to do is I want to get away from this invoice line item amount. There's a rule of thumb that is almost always, it's not always, but it's almost always. You'll almost never store a value in any table that you can derive from information you already have in the database. Well, the problem is that let's run a query. Let's go. Here's my query. What do I want to see? I want to say select. Invoice ID. Sum. Invoice line item amount. Let's see, from. Invoice line items. Okay. So this should give me the invoice total. What's that? Yeah, I do need a group by here, definitely. Group by. Let's see, what do I want? I want to find any that from invoice line items. In it. Inner join. Let's call this one. And so which one of these do I want it from? I want it from L. on L okay.
You just capitalize L so this looks like an I.
Yeah. L let's look at this invoice total. Let me get some space here where we can see it. So I want to see, it's going to be I, isn't it? So I want to see the sum of the invoice line item amount and the invoice total, where okay, show me the invoice ID, invoice total from the invoices, the sum of the invoice line item amount. They have to be interjoined. And I want them where the invoice total is inconsistent with the invoice line item amount.
Do you have to group by invoice total?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to group by invoice. We'll punt and we'll take it out of there. Now I don't have to group by it. Okay, so I'm just I want to see the ID and the sum where it is inconsistent. I think I'm going to get one. Okay, do have to group by. An aggregate may not appear in the where clause. Oh, okay. I'll get this going in a minute. Bah. Bottom line, I'll fix this in just a second. By the time we get there, I don't want to get bogged down in this thing. Basically, I want to select the invoice ID. Let's select I.invoice ID. I dot invoice total. Group by invoice ID, and this is the simplest way to do it. Just put them both in there. That's what you were suggesting to begin with. Let's see if it runs. And I got a whole bunch of stuff here. So I'm going to have in the where clause, the where. I.invoice total does not equal the sum. Now this should work. I should have just done what you suggested at the beginning, put them both in the group by. So I've got them grouped by the invoice ID and the invoice total. I don't think I can say S here. Now I'm going to have to use an outer join on this, so I'll have to join on that. I'll get this fixed and I'll send it out as an announcement. The bottom line is that one of these guys in here is off by a penny. And which one is it? That should have worked, but.
You have a third column, that's the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it wouldn't be crude. We can just do it like that.
But how's the group by work?
Well, it's the group by doesn't need invoice total anymore. I'm expecting this to work.
Would you have to put that whole thing back? Like, what's going on?
No. Well, I'm going to have to do an outer join here, so I'll get it. The bottom line is that I have data in that table that are not consistent with the invoice line item. Somebody wanting to talk? I might put that one out for an assignment. I'll fix it in just a minute, but I'm going to have to sit down and think about it. I'm going to have to do an outer join to finding unmatched records. So okay, go back to this. Invoice totals. Did I do it here? Okay, so I create this view invoice totals as a select invoice. So this, I'm fixing that problem with a view. This view is invoice totals as select invoice ID, sum as invoice total from invoice line items. So here I have a view that is summing the invoice line items amount, and then I select it as now we need everything, so I'll use outer join, retrieve the rows without an invoice total. Okay, here's the new invoices, and I create this guy by outer joining him with the invoice totals, and basically now I see in new invoices, I see the sum there instead of that static value. As a rule, we don't create a table that has something in it that I can derive elsewhere. I'll get that query fixed. And
Can I take a stab at it?
Sure.
Oh, okay, go back to the page.
Back where?
Yeah, this is
It'd be an inner join.
Oh, I was thinking, so the select, make it 3 columns again.
Well, yeah. I don't think there's any way to do it.
No, I think so. Go back to the group by. So same thing. Keep comment out.
Yeah.
So that where needs to be a having because.
Right, but I can't put invoice total in the having line. I don't believe I can.
Having works for aggregate.
It does, but I don't think it's going to let me put it in here as a having. It's not throwing an error right now. I don't believe it's going to let me do this because, well, yeah, it is. Okay, you were right. I was expecting it not to allow this, but I guess it's okay. Yeah, good catch on that. Okay. Invoice ID 12 is off by a penny. So if I go look at invoice total, it is $662. If I go look at the invoice line item amount for invoice 12, I find that one of these guys I think those are right. If I go look at the invoice total, so the sum, they sum to, for invoice ID 12, they sum to $662.01, but the invoice total is reflecting $662. If it's off by a penny, it could be off by $1 million just as easily.
Wait, how did that happen?
I put it in there just to demonstrate this. I guess I'll save that query. Could also do it with an outer join, but questions? Hey, Taylor, you there? Would you mute your microphone, please?
Sure, I'm sorry.
I like to leave them unmuted so you can talk. Do you know how?
No. How do you do it?
Let's see. Down at the either at the top or the bottom, there's a microphone icon, and under it it says mute. I don't know whether you can see mine or not. I doubt it. I'm pointing to it now, but I doubt that you can see my controls. I can mute you. There. You're now muted. Okay. Next. Database views and updating. Some of them I cannot update is the bottom line here. And if I have a complicated SQL query and I create a view on it, would be updatable. And so if I have a, if it includes a subselect, a sum in the subselect, I cannot update that view, because if I update the sum, I'm going to try to update a view that has an aggregate field in it that's derived from an aggregate field. So invoice total in this case is derived from the sum of the invoice line items. If I did this, I created a view out of this, it would act like invoices, and it would show me the same information in invoices, but it would not, I would not be able to update it. I would not be able to update the invoice total, because the invoice total is a sum. Which one do I update? I can't update the sum.
Oh, and then for the sum, there's the view. If it has no line items, then or you can't have an invoice with no line items.
Well, I don't know that you can have it. Why couldn't you have a? There's nothing that is stopping you from having an invoice with no line items.
Oh, well, I'm saying like
That would be a childless parent.
I mean, I'm saying like practically speaking.
Practically speaking, no, it wouldn't be.
Invoice without items.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's a little bit like asking, can you be a pet owner if you don't have any pets? There's nothing in the database that would stop you from, which one will you put in first, the invoice or the invoice line item? Right. So if you're doing something that blocks you from having a childless parent, and it is possible to do that. You can't do it in a constraint, but there's a way to do it. Now I have a problem. If I want to insert a new invoice, what do I insert first? Do I insert the invoice or do I insert the children? Well, I can't insert the children until I have a parent. So blocking having childless parents is problematic just because how do I ever insert one? I have to insert the parent. That means that for just a split second, they're going to have no children until I can get the children inserted. Right. I call it the chicken or the egg problem. So I'm going to have to, at some point, have a invoice. If I insert an invoice, I'm going to have if the invoice total is 0, then I can't have any. I have to allow childless parents, even though I don't like to. Deleting rows using database views in general. You can delete rows. Most of the time, the requirements I use for update, insert, and delete are that the view is based on one table and includes all of the rows. All of the columns, excuse me. And there are other ways that can be. But if it is based on one table and includes all columns, then it is updatable. Now, there are other conditions when it is. I list what those are. Let me see if I can get through this. Okay, here's the quiz. Okay, there's one other item I wanted to talk about, and I talked about that from let's go back to the HR database, the HR table, or the personnel table. And so I create a table, create. And it's got something in it. I'll just put something dummy in it. Can't have that. Okay, so we just created a little dummy table here. Now, who can access this table? Well, assumably, we have different users in this database. So I have users logging in from HR. I have users logging in from accounting, right? And
I have a question on the syntax. What is this putting into the table?
I'm not trying to put anything in there. I'm just trying to demonstrate here is a table. Okay, it's just a generic table. I don't want to put anything in there. That's got one field. Its name is X. It's an integer. I'm guessing it's the primary key. It's about my only candidate. Okay. Grant. Select. On. Personnel. To a user, and it can also be a group of users. So for example, I can group let's call giving them a role. So let's say I just have one user, it'll work the same way. To the user HR. Okay, now I've granted HR has the right to select from personnel. When I create a table, I, the database owner, I'm the programmer, I'm the database owner, I'm the only one that can access that table. Nobody else can access that table. Okay. If I grant select on that table, then other people may select from that table. Specifically, anyone who is logged in as HR can select from my table. They can see the table, and they can write a select from where query using that table. They can join that to other tables and use the data out of that table. Okay. What else could I do? I could grant. What else could I grant? Update. What else could I grant? Yep. What else could I grant?
Are delete and update, like kind of interchangeable?
Are delete and update interchangeable? No, they're not. Update says I can go in and change rows to be some different value. Delete says I can take it out of the database.
But you could, let's say you got update but not delete.
If I got update and not delete,
Couldn't you just update the field you want to delete to like this nonsense?
could I trash all the data? Yes.
Then if you wanted to.
But I can't delete anything. I can go trash it, but I can't delete it.
So, okay.
You have to trust your users to some extent. Typically speaking, the database administrator is a fairly high-ranking person in the organization. And if somebody was able to get into the database, as they probably will be able to if they work there, they can do a lot of damage. But I'm saying they just made a career decision. And you have to train our users. We have to keep our users out of trouble. And so the idea being that I want to make it as difficult as possible to do it, but given that you are a user of the database, you are a trusted person. If I let you see the table in the next class, in the next course, we'll push people back out of the tables, and we'll have untrusted users. Okay. Right now, this user, HR, is trusted. He can see my table. Now, what if I created a view and I did not give them this right to select, update, insert, and delete and insert on personnel, but I gave them those rights on the view? Then they would have the ability to insert, delete, update, or select data in that view, but not the table. So they could use the view, but they can't even see the table unless I give them the right to see it. Okay. To take it away, revoke select on personnel, and this changes to from. So it's revoke select on personnel from HR, and similarly the others work the same way. There is one other one. Well, actually there's quite a few other ones, but I can grant references on my table to some user or group of users. What does this mean? This means that I'm going to allow you, if you are HR, I'm going to allow you to create a foreign key into my table. Why might I not want to do that? Anybody online want to answer? Why might I not want you to create a foreign key into my table? Thoughts? Yes, I'm talking. Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, just foreign key has some constraint, and if he doesn't put that constraint on, he might some null data or invalid data.
Correct. The constraint is the problem because when this person creates a foreign key into my table, they're constraining my table. For example, if my parent key has children, I cannot delete that parent key. I cannot update that parent key. Okay. The other issue is that if I can create a foreign key into a table, I can, by the trial and error, find out what the data are in that table. Okay. So that's something that you might want to give or not to give. Okay. I'm going to mute. Practice. Okay. There's another one that is almost never given, and that is the privilege to alter, grant alter on personnel to HR. Oh, almost never. Why? What does alter mean? It means that you can add, delete, change the definition of the table. That's one I reserve for myself. You will usually have 2 or 3 users, right? The lowest level user is the database owner. A DBO, that's what that means, database owner. I can do anything with my tables. Yeah, I own them. I can delete them. Okay. Database owner, I'm going to protect that password like Fort Knox. Okay. I will have one higher level of a user, and that is the database programmer. The database programmer can create views, can create other programs, and in the next class we're going to be creating these programs. So I can create compiled programs that run on the database. To this programmer, I will grant the rights to my tables, but I won't give that programmer the right to delete my tables because I don't want him accidentally to. I'm not going to give that programmer any rights that he or she does not have to have. It's probably me. I don't want to fat finger something accidentally and have a typo that wipes out the whole database. So I'm going to make myself change users. If I want to delete a table or change the column definition of a table, I'm going to have to change over to the DBO. And then I have I have my DBO, database owner. DBP, database programmer, has high-level access. So the database programmer writes code, and the database programmer owns that code, and he or she gives rights to the users to use his or her code. And then so we have just normal database users. Database users, I try to keep them out of trouble by being very selective about what I let them do. And then finally we have the least trusted, which is public. That's just somebody that happens to be logged in. And typically a public user can't even see the database. But the user of my database is someone I don't really trust. Not so much that I think they're malicious. If they're malicious, they have no business being in my database at all. But they're a person like, a secretary or a low-level person that might have to use my database for something. And they have certain things that they can do. I'm going to let you select, but I'm not going to let you insert, update data, anything like that. I'm going to give you access to views to just keep you out of trouble. Okay. Questions? Okay, I wanted to do a review next time, so I'm going to, these guys are fairly, creating views is fairly straightforward. I don't believe I have any questions in there about the grant, although this is very important to database. I don't think we have any questions in there on that. Basically, the thing to remember about a view is it is a SQL select statement that has been compiled and stored in the database as a program. And when you select from it, you are really reaching through it and selecting from the underlying data. A view can be updated with certain restrictions. A view you can delete, and for the same thing, you can update, delete, insert, all of that stuff with certain restrictions. A view can generally not have an order by clause. If you have the with check option on a view, then you cannot update that view or insert into that view any record that would not be in the view. So I can't change a record such that it drops out of the view. Views are very useful for enforcing security on the database. So if I have a view with check option, I cannot modify any record that is not in that view, and I can't insert a record that would not be in that view. So usually you do with check option if it's for security. Questions? And it's 11:19.
Would you ever nest views, or
would you ever nest views, create a view based on another view? Yes, you could do that.
like people do that?
Sure, you can do that. Remember the derived table? Let me see. Go back to my modules. What module was subqueries? Page 5, derived tables. That derived table right there in the from is essentially a view that is created just ad hoc, just for the purpose. So the view is named D, so it's like saying create view D as this, but it's not saved. It's just there for the moment, right? So we're selecting from D. So that is, in fact, a view. So what would happen if I said okay, there's the take all this, copy that. That becomes my view. Now, remember, since I'm creating a view, he has to be in his own Go block. So I create the view D. Okay. How is this different from these two taken together? There's a slight difference. One of them, D, stays around and I can use it later. And the first one, I have to create it each time. but there's nothing special. These both have exactly the same output. And then what if I created a view from this? Well, would that meet your definition of a nested view? And I guess so. There's no reason you can't do it. And in Access, you do it all the time. I don't do it very much, but there's no reason you couldn't. It wouldn't be, you're not duplicating the data. So views are cheap to store, expensive to run. Views are more expensive than selecting from a table because I have to go through the view to get to the table. Okay. Goodness, it's almost 11:30. Okay, that leaves us with just one more silly little module. We have not yet done module 12. I think I will do that one kind of quickly next week. This is database design. We talk about normalization, database normalization here, and I wanted to.
I saw in the homework.
What's that?
Oh, in the index homework, said those third normal.
Oh, okay.
I guess that
In the homework, did I ask you something about third normal?
But you mentioned that this was the third.
Okay. We talked about the first normal form on day one. And the first normal form essentially says that all databases have it says no duplicate rows. And so that implies the existence of a primary key. There's something that is unique about every row. I want that to be one field. As long as they're just different, there are no two duplicate rows, I'm going to let you call it in that normal form. The other thing about first normal form is that the access is by content only. In other words, I never ask for the third row. Now, selecting the top 10 is violating the first normal form. The other thing is that a field has exactly one value, only one value. You will always use the full value of the field. If I select the area code, and remember I told you to do that on test one, find all the area codes of 779 or whatever it was. That was violating the first normal form because I have a telephone number, and I'm going in and I'm treating that telephone number as if it were two values. It's an area code and a phone number. Maybe it's an area code, a prefix, and a phone number. If you're going to treat it that way, then you have to have the area code as one field, the prefix as another field, and the rest of the phone number another. And probably if you have a 1 or a 0 at the beginning, that has to be another field all its own. So if you're going to use the first name and the last name differently, then they have to be in two fields.
In that case, you probably have to do that.
Well, I don't have any problem with a view that combines them. A view does not have to be in first normal form. If you are going to use the data, then if you're going to treat the data as two different things. So if my name is John Doe, and I'm ever going to want to go in and search for everybody whose last name is Doe, then the first name and last name need to be two different fields to be in first normal form. So no duplicate rows, single valued fields, and access by content only. There is a row ID. Believe it, and you do have access to it. If you use it, you're violating first normal. Second normal form says you should always use all of the key. The whole key. In other words, all data should be accessed by the entire key. You should not have invoice ID, invoice sequence number, where you're just going in and using only the invoice ID. Okay, you should always use the whole key. And then finally, when you get to third normal form, the data should not depend on anything but the key. There should not be something else in there that could be a primary key by design that isn't. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't know whether I'm going to do the quiz and all on number 12. By next week, before next week, I will have all of my grading caught up before the end of the weekend. I'm working on it now. So you should have seen, if you have anything that's old, it should have been fairly well graded by now. So I'm working on the stuff that's only a week or two old. So I'm going to get there. I've got, I don't know, 35 or 40 assignments, individual assignments to grade, which that's not bad. I can get through them in about 2 or 3 minutes. So that's 2 or 3 hours of grading, and I will have it caught up. And I make a commitment to you that unless you turn in something right away, right at the last minute, as I'm getting done, I will have my grading caught up. I'll have everything that's been there for any length of time caught up, returned to you. The deadline for turning in old assignments will be Friday. I'm just going to call it Friday. That means that you can turn it in through a week from today, next Friday. Okay. At midnight on Friday, old assignments, past due assignments must be turned in. Now, if I make an assignment that is due after Friday, that doesn't count. Okay. Please note that sometimes this is more trouble than it's worth. If I set I don't pay a whole lot of attention to what the grade book says your grade is. I use a spreadsheet. Export that to a spreadsheet. But right now it is set not to count ungraded assignments as 0. Problem with that is if I have test 2 in there and we didn't do a test 2, then that's going to count as 0 for everybody. And that's going to make everybody real happy, won't it? My average is 60 and I've got everything turned in. And so sometimes I'll go turn that on. But then I always have to go tweak a lot of stuff to turn off the zeros that I don't want to be zeros. What I will try to do is by next week, have everything graded to where I can have a private conversation with everyone. People who come online will be able to have that conversation. I have a headset that I can turn on and not broadcast our conversation to the whole room. I can have or we'll use chat or something. Anyway, I don't want I don't want everybody to hear it, but I'll tell you what your grade is and what you need on the final. The final will cover test 2. Okay. So I mentioned sometimes I have been known to excuse people, but since we did not have a test 2, the final will count as test 2, and the final will usually raise your grade. The other thing I will have out there before, about the same time I get your assignments graded, I will get the practice test, the practice final up and running. Okay. Or the practice test 2, I guess. Maybe both.
Is it comprehensive or is it just?
It is comprehensive. Programming is comprehensive. It will focus on the second piece. Okay, questions? Let me unmute everybody. People online may speak. Okay, go ahead, Anita.
I have a question for module 8.
Okay, I'm going to come right back to you now. Go ahead, Taylor.
I got a question about the quizzes.
Taylor, you're breaking up. Okay, you can use, there's a, on, oh, somebody sent me a chat. Let me go check it here. From Taylor. Taylor, you sent me something about quizzes. Are we to do these? Yes. You'll usually find them to be easy. There's a few. If I see one where people are really having trouble with it, I forget what it was. One of them asked you to write some code, and it was counting stuff wrong. That if you just I don't like the ones that have you do code and then if you make one wrong keystroke or have an extra space in it, it counts it wrong. I've been pulling those out. Yes, the quizzes are counted. I don't weight them real heavily. You get to do it as many times as you want.
Oh, wait, so our points are weighted differently, or they're all one?
Okay. The question is, are the points weighted differently? As a teacher, I weight certain things more than others. The quizzes, I don't put as much weight, so I would probably add up the assignments. I'm mainly going to look at the quizzes and say, did you do them? Okay. So I have a lot of leeway on what I do. As long as I don't come around and you had an A, I say, I don't like you, I'm going to give you a C. I can't do that. I treat everybody the same way. Okay. Others? Okay. I'm going to try to remember that chat to keep that window available. Okay, Anita, your question?
I am stuck on module 8 exercises, question number 7.
Module 8.
There's nothing else.
Yes, if you wish to dismiss now, dismissing to lab now. So we are now in lab. Okay, in the exercises.
Yes, number 7.
Six. Seven. 7 reads, write a select statement that returns the vendor name, vendor city, and vendor state that is located, I guess that means located, in a unique city and state. In other words, do not include vendors who share a city and a state with any other vendors. Order by city, then state. Okay. And yes, I agree, this one is tricky. So first we're going to write a select from group by that gives you the city-state pairs and filter them in the having clause. Okay, so I want to start this. Select.
Vendor name, vendor city, vendor state.
Yep. Yeah, but right now I'm got this going. So yeah, I'll take your question, but let me finish up with this one. Easiest thing to do here, just a moment, and I'll go I have a solution to that. I'll be right back with the, I'll turn that on in just a second. I'm going to go someplace else. Pull up this. I've already got that one typed up. Module 8.
It's okay. I'll ask next week.
Okay.
Yeah, the question's actually more relevant than I asked last week. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Select vendor name. I'm coming right back.
Sure.
Okay, let me turn this on. Share. Okay. I suggested, I gave you a suggestion there. And my suggestion was, lost my module. What I hate about Canvas, if you go from one to another, it drops where you were. Seven, 8. Okay, derived table.
Oh, we were working on 7?
On 7.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. It says first write a select from group that gives you the city-state pairs and filter it in the having clause, meaning where it's great, where the pairs, where it's greater than 1, or where it's equal to 1. So vendor city, vendor state, from vendors. So if I execute this, so I select vendor city, vendor state, that's the pairs from vendors where everybody is the same. So I'm grouping by that. I could have said distinct. Notice that I got 38 rows, and that's okay. Lots of times I'll delete one or something in there. I think I said 39, but I have 38 rows here in mine. Okay, so is this pretty straightforward? I believe that I would get the same thing if instead of saying having count, I think if I say distinct, I think I'm going to get the same thing here. No, I got 53 rows. Oh, okay. Here I'm saying where the vendor ID is equal to 1. So where the count of the vendor IDs. So that's not exactly the same thing. So basically the subquery looks like this. It says select the vendor city, vendor state from vendors, group by vendor city, vendor state, having the count. So when I execute this, I get these guys. So the city and the state, unique cities and states where I just have one vendor ID there. Okay.
So we don't need to add the vendor name?
I'm going to add the vendor name in just a minute. And my lights just went out on me here. Okay, now this is going to be a subquery. Okay, the subquery, I'm on the outer query, I'm going to select the vendor name, right, from vendors V, and I'm going to inner join it with that query. So I want the vendor city and the vendor state from the inner query, right? Now I've got vendor city, vendor state, so I have to qualify them with the name of the query from vendors as V inner join this query right here. Now I name that guy D, and the on is just pretty straightforward. And so my overall query looks like this. Right? So select vendor name, vendor city, vendor state from vendors as V, and I'm inner joining that with this derived table D, joining them on vendor state and vendor city, order by. So this is the one that's giving me the pairs, vendor city, vendor state. And so when I run this query, I should still get the same number. I get the same 38. So these guys all live in a unique, no other vendor name lives in Brea, California. There's only one. And so I get that from the subselect. Okay?
Yeah, but it's quite difficult.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
Take this one. Remember, you want to break this one up into different pieces. So basically, I want to create this guy. I want the city and the state from vendors grouped by city and state, where there's only one vendor ID in that city and state.
So select vendor state, so not distinct?
Well, the distinct vendor state, the important thing that I want is within this city and state, I have only one vendor ID.
Equals to 1?
Right. So this is a city state. So for example, you could test it, and I want to find them where I have exactly 2 in that city state. I could, if I put that to 2, it would be slightly different. Let's change it to 2 and see what happens. If I run this, so I have 2 vendors in Anaheim, 2 vendors in Chicago, 2 in St. Louis, 2 there. As long, but the problem with that is, oops, that it's going to give me trouble in the outer query because now I'm going to have 2 vendor IDs. Well, I'll have 2 rows. So this one, when I run the inner query, I know that I have 1 vendor name that is in Inglewood, California.
Mm-hmm.
I have 1 vendor name in Manhattan Beach, California. So the question then becomes just, okay, what's that vendor name? Okay, vendor name comes from the outer table, and the vendor city, vendor state come from the inner table. So the only way that I get that vendor city, vendor state is because they have exactly 1 vendor.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, the derived table is a good way to do that. Other questions?
And on 8, I am getting an error like a vendor ID.
Read the select statement that returns 4 columns, vendor name, invoice number, invoice name, 1 row per. You have 1 table query that finds the minimum date.
And we call it D.
Yeah, let's, vendor ID and the minimum date, grouping by vendor ID. So this finds the date. So this is our derived table. You don't have to call it D. So I have to give it a name. I usually call my derived tables D. And basically, now I'm going to do an inner join on this. On invoices. Now, what did I do here? It should be vendor ID, not vendor.
Yeah, it's giving me an error, like invalid vendor ID.
On invoices.vendor ID, it looks like I dropped off the vendor ID. Let's see, what is this? This should be vendor ID. Invoices.vendor ID is equal to D.vendor ID. Basically, this one's pretty, let me save. This one depends on that subselect. So on number 8, you get this, the select says, I know the vendor ID and I know the minimum invoice date for that vendor ID.
So it will be as my min date or D?
It doesn't matter what you name it, whatever you name it here.
No, but we are calling the whole drive table as D, so we should change it as my min date.
It can be, you have to give it you have to give it an alias. If you're going to use a derived table, all fields must be aliased.
Okay.
So you're going to select vendor ID and my min date from D.
Okay.
And let's see, what else does you need? Vendor name, invoice number come from the outer table. The invoice total. The invoice date comes from is my min date. And
yes.
then it's joined. The outer table is invoices. The inner table is the derived table D. So where the invoices IDs are the same, so you're always going to pick up the minimum date. I have 33 rows. I believe one for each unique vendor ID.
So the outer table, like a subquery, would come after the join, right?
No, it would be a select. Okay, so here's our inner query. So this should give me 33 rows. I'm expecting 34 rows. I think that's what I said I got. So on the outer query, select something. I think it said specifically. From what? From what? What's the table I'm interested in?
Invoices.
Invoices. Inner join. this thing as D. And be nice if I close my parentheses. So I've given it a name. Now, the trick is that if you're going to name it, just like if you had a view, you're going to have to give every field up here. I can't have a column without a name. So if I'm going to have it a derived table, basically I'm creating a view here. And then on invoices, I probably would alias invoices, but I can or I don't have to. And basically this is everything. Oh, I got 114 rows. There's a where in here. What was my where? With the earliest date, okay. And so I just want, you know, where it's in here. I need to select the my men date. So once I select the right stuff, if I'm selecting this field, it will narrow it down. I'm selecting everything. So I'm just going.
Basically, in our subquery, when we are driving a new table, so we are taking the same table and then give it a name as a D.
The derived table in this case comes from the invoices, so that the fact that they both come from the same table don't have to know. The inner query is the one that gets the minimum date. And so when I select stuff from invoices, and I select my min date, where am I taking my min date from? I don't think I have to put, looks like I have accidentally hit insert. I don't think I have to say D dot, but I think I will anyway. Once I say that, now I'm only going to see the minimum date. Let's see. So I want the invoice ID from invoices and the minimum date, INVOICE. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting the, all right. And that's the minimum date. The earliest date I have for invoice ID 51 .
So is it better to have the everything like asterisk to select, or just give the name?
What do you mean?
As per our question, like it's okay to select asterisk.
It is okay to select the asterisk, yes. I personally prefer to specify the dates.
Okay.
Let me see what I have on this one. On Okay, yeah, you're going to have a three-way join here. You're going to have to join invoices and vendors and then bring in the derived table. Okay, that's what I'm saying here. So we're going to have three joins on this one. So from invoices as I, inner join as V. So we have to have this one on I dot. So I have to have the invoices and the vendors because I want the vendor ID so we want the vendor name that has to come from the vendors table, and the invoice number that has to come from the invoices table, and the invoice date comes from the derived table. So I have several things working here. I got to get the vendor name and I got to get the invoice number. So that means that I have to have the vendors and the invoices in there. Why is that? Inner join. And so then there's the minimum date on, let's see. Has to be D. Now,
Yeah, it's a whole lot of tables.
yeah, okay, so what am I interested in? I want the, so we have vendor name, invoice total. So vendor name, invoice number, invoice date, and but instead of invoice date, I'm going to use my min date. So that should get it. So I'm taking the vendor name from the vendors, invoice number from the invoices, invoice total from the invoices. My min date comes from the derived table.
Okay.
There's a where in here someplace. Anyway, this is the way you start with that one.
Would you attach this file to the announcements?
Well, yeah, this is going to be in the recording is in the.
And you will also attach the file?
I will probably not attach that file. No.
Okay.
I will try to let me see if I can let me see what I'll give you, and I'll attach a file. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Thank you.
Others. Josh, you doing okay? Doug?
Doing good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll see you guys then next week. Like I say, the grading will be caught up. I'm going to hope for getting caught up today. I won't guarantee that I won't run into tomorrow on it. But by the end of the weekend for sure. Everything that is turned in now will be graded. Okay. I'm going to end the meeting now. And so this thing can start compiling.
Thank you so much. And
Let's
have a nice day.
see.
Nice
So,
weekend.
hang on, let me see who's chatting with me. Josh says, yeah. Okay. Ending the meeting.